Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here. A particular greetings to our guest and Monica, of course, who's moderating the webinar. Marta, who doesn't need any introduction. Charles Kupchan from the Council of Foreign Relations, and Professor at Harvard, Georgetown. Sorry. A very well-known figure in international affairs. Just a couple of words on M&M, which is organizing this event. M&M is an association born almost a year ago, a few months before. It puts together people from different backgrounds: managers, bankers, entrepreneurs, diplomats, foreign service, and civil service in mainly in Italy. I would say almost exclusively in Italy, although many people live abroad. There is no specific political orientation, but it's quite broad actually in the background of the people volunteering for the association. And the association has, put together people who have a passion for I would say, the res publica. In that sense, we have made proposals and provided ideas to stakeholders and more general to the government, to public policy makers on several issues. The liquidity at the beginning of the pandemic, the recovery fund, the public administration, and so on. This is one of the few events that we have done that we are doing in foreign policy. It's a shame on us actually, but I think if we start with a great one. And Monica, please, the floor is yours, and thank you again for your availability to moderate this panel.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you, and thank everybody for being here. So our topic tonight will be America's Back. What does it mean for Europe? What I would suggest to our speakers is that we make a first round with their considerations, and then we open the floor. Those who are not talking, please go mute, because it's going to be complicated. There's many of us in link tonight. So, first of all, Charles Kupchan, as Fabrizio was saying, it doesn't need any presentation, but you just wrote a piece about renewal at home requires restraint abroad, was the headline. And these days, America is definitely back, because we have seen the exchanges with Putin, we have seen this rocky start with the Chinese, and where do we put in perspective Europe in this scenario? Charlie, floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Nice to have the opportunity to join everyone today. I would say that the picture from this side of the Atlantic looks pretty good, in the sense that the Trump era is behind us. I mean, we're all suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's going to take a long time to get a good night's sleep. It's been a very painful 4 years, but I think that the U.S. is back in important respects. The most important being that the person who sits in the Oval Office is again a person of integrity, of decency, of civility, who believes in the rule of law, and who will stand by liberal democracy at home and abroad. And that in and of itself is revolutionary, given that we have lived through a near-death experience here in the United States when it comes to American democracy. So, and that should not be underestimated, because, what happens here affects the rest of the world. And I do think that had Trump been reelected, it would have really fueled continuing populism and undermined political centrism on your side of the Atlantic as well. So there are very beneficial ripple effects coming out of the election here. And I think the second important thing to keep an eye on is that the Biden administration on day one returned to multilateralism. And if there was one thing that I found most troubling about America First, it was the unilateralism, because we live in a world that is irretrievably interdependent. There's no way we're going to tackle climate change, cybersecurity, migration, not to mention traditional security issues, if we don't work together. And so going back to the Paris Climate Agreement, to the Iran nuclear deal, to the World Health Organization, affirming that the US is going to stay put in Europe and be a loyal ally to Europeans, this is all very good news. So the third comment I'd make that is, I think, important for Europeans is that in some ways, I think that the Atlantic space will get even more attention than normal. And that's in part because Biden is an Atlanticist. He cares deeply about Europe and the European project. When I worked in the White House under Obama, I went to Ukraine 6 times with Joe Biden. This is a guy who is always ready to get on the phone or get on the airplane and deal with Europe, with the Balkans, with Ukraine. So you have a fan back in the Oval Office. And I also think that because of what this country has gone through, the Atlantic community looms larger. That is to say that we know that our experiment is fragile.
Voglio fare
we know that it's fragile on your side of the Atlantic as well. We don't probably want to talk about Brexit, but the fact that Brexit has happened suggests that populism is alive and well on both sides of the Atlantic. And so I think that there is a focus here in the United States on re-anchoring democracy, on redoubling our effort to build alliances with our fellow democracies. And that says to me, more time for Europe, more focus on Europe, less. So that's all good news for those of us who are Atlanticists, and I guess most of us on this call are. Let me then make just a few cautionary remarks before I end my opening. The first is that Trump, even though a dangerous person, was an astute politician. And he correctly sensed that for many Americans, there was too much world and not enough America. Too many wars, too much free trade, too many immigrants, too many pacts, too many alliances. A lot of Americans were saying, what about us, right? What about us? Do we count? And Biden, I think, has to pay attention to that voice in the American electorate that says, what about us? And I think he is going to pay attention to that voice. And that's why every time he has a chance to speak about foreign policy, what's the first thing he says? He says, we need a foreign policy for the middle class. We need a foreign policy that works for average Americans. And that's because the political foundations of American engagement abroad have really been shaken. And he needs to rebuild those foundations. And that means not just focusing on foreign policies that work for America, but policies that work for America. And so I think you will see a president that is focused very heavily on the domestic agenda in the coming year, because investment in pandemic recovery, in healthcare, in infrastructure, in jobs, this is all about making sure that the United States snaps back. And if we don't get those kinds of big investments, then Biden may be a temporary detour from Trump rather than the new normal. But that's going to require a lot of money, a lot of heavy lifting, and a lot of effort. And that's why I think it's very important to keep in mind that, yes, America is back, but it's an America that is politically and economically constrained and that will be focusing on the home front. My final comment kind of ties that comment to foreign policy, and that is that I do think you can expect the U.S. to continue pulling back, particularly from the Middle East, particularly from the Mediterranean. I think that Biden will more or less continue what Trump began, which is a process of strategic retrenchment, mainly from the Middle East. And he will be sensitive to what allies bring to the table. Some of you may have noticed just in the last few days, South Korea has agreed to increase what it spends to pay for American troops in the Korean Peninsula. They realized that burden sharing is very front and center in American politics. So my final comment would simply be to say to Europeans, meet Biden halfway. Step up to the plate on becoming a better partner, both geopolitically and politically. He's going to look to you to confront China in a more unified way. I think that's not going to be easy. There will be good days and there will be bad days when it comes to a united democratic front toward China. But I think it is important that the Europeans are ready to pick up the slack of an America who is reducing its footprint, particularly in the Middle East. So whether it's in Libya or Syria or the Eastern Med or Nagorno-Karabakh, I would encourage Europeans to be ready to do more. I will stop there.
Thank you as usual, Charlie, for your outstanding presentation and for the overview you gave us. And I think we have the opportunity here to do the other halfway because Stefano Sannino joined us in the meantime. And so I'm just handing over to him just to help us to do the other halfway to understand what are we doing? Where are we moving towards the United States? Knowing that the good news is that we have someone in the Oval Office who's a fan of Europe.
Thank you very much, and apologies. It's I couldn't manage to connect with the proper computer, so I'm now on my mobile, which is a little bit. But it's okay. I think that important is that we can manage to connect. I think that I will follow very much the line of reason of Charles, because the first of all, to say that the arrival of the new administration, Biden administration, has been taken with a lot of relief. I would say overall in Europe, certainly in Brussels. We had been accustomed in the last 4 years to a quite rough journey. So I mean, the idea of having a partner that was ready to engage, to recognizing the centrality of the transatlantic partnership, the importance of the traditional alliances, is something that has taken us has been taken here with a lot of relief. And this has generated an enormous sense of commitment for this process of re-engagement with the United States. To the point that I think there has been a number of communications, council conclusions, different documents that have tried to set up the overall picture and the framework for our relationship with the United States for years to come. Work has already started. I would say it started since day one with re-engagement at all possible levels, from our top levels. I mean, not too long ago, the President of the Commission had a conversation with President Biden. The High Representative has spoken with Blinken already once extensively, and then Blinken himself was joining the Foreign Affairs Council in February, the first occasion essentially that he could meet collectively the foreign ministers of the EU. And then on the the different sectors from climate to biodiversity, from energy to financial services, from migration to insecurity issues to data protection. So essentially, I would say that there is not a single aspect of the overall relations with US that we have not started engaging thoroughly. And now, next week, we'll start with trade, which is another big bite. In this picture, and then I will go more on foreign policy and on other elements in this picture, we cannot, let's say, not say that clearly, while the spirit and the sense of engagement is very strong, and the Atlanticism is undoubted, there is a point of converging or diverging interests on a number of issues. And so this is also important to keep in mind, because we cannot imagine that from now on, all the things that have been difficult, even during the period of Obama, and have been difficult for decades, will disappear all of a sudden. So we need to be able to do some, let's say, management of expectations in understanding that we will have our maybe diverging views, but that what is important is that we can manage to have a methodology that could allow us to face and to solve these issues together. And there I come to one of the points that Charles was making before concerning the sort of more inward attitude of the United States, but I would say also more inward attitude of the European Union. We are living a period of very complex crisis, which is going on the top of a financial crisis from which we still have, let's say, we have not completely recuperated, from a migration crisis, which has also left a lot of scares. So in a way, our heads of state and governments, as the President of the United States, has to think about, let's say, internal constituencies and how we deal with these internal constituencies. So I'm not, I would say, astonished or worried by the fact that the foreign policy will be seen also through the prism of the internal policy or internal problems that we are going to face. But once again, I think that what is important is that we have very clear that we are anchoring this relationship to a determination to make it the center of the, let's say, of a sort of world order. I'm not saying that we have to do this alone, that the Atlantic all of a sudden becomes the only place. I think that the Pacific is, and the Indo-Pacific maybe is equally important. And this is something that we are both looking at with a lot of attention. The first, let's say, meeting was the Quad that Biden said was the Quad, with Japan, Australia, and India as a signal also of the importance that is given to the region, apart from neighbors, let's say, which is the normal reaction. But this is an important element that we need to take into account. We are also engaging extensively in that region from all points of view, developing our own strategy in Indo-Pacific, having now strengthening our relationship with India, having a strategic partner like Japan, creating a strategic partnership with ASEAN. So I mean, all that you are, let's say, we need to stay focused on the importance also of that part of the world. On foreign policy, I think that we share a number of concerns. I would say I have no doubts that the relationship with China is on the top of the agenda for everybody. it was during the previous administration as well, and we had started at least a process of consultation with the United States on China. And this is a dialogue that is really started with this new administration. With the previous one, we had just more or less defined the framework. Now we have had already the first concrete meeting, and all others will follow. And this will remain, no doubt, a very relevant focus of our policy. But then I think that there are a number of other areas where we will need to keep on working together, where I understand that the expectations are that the European Union takes the lead, and we are willing to do so. I'm thinking about the Eastern Mediterranean and the work that we are doing with Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, and around the problem of the region are, I would say, a clear signal of our engagement. If I have to single out one file on which we have been busy in this last year, it's certainly the Eastern Mediterranean. But then Western Balkans is also another important part of the story, taking into account the complexity of the situation that we still have there. Eastern Partnership, no doubt about, Libya. So, I mean, there are a number of areas where we will certainly be willing to take here a very high profile. One thing that I want to stress in this context is our common commitment in multilateral fora. And this is I think that from that point of view, there is a convergence of views about the importance of moving away from the multipolar state of mind and entering much more into the multilateral state of mind. And it is true that the re-entering the Paris Agreement or the WHO or the work that that also is being done now with the appointment of the Director General of WTO are all elements that are bonding well from that point of view, and we are willing to continue working together in that area. Maybe one final point, because in a way there was a sort of challenge about the importance for the European Union to take more responsibility and also to, let's say, meet halfway the concerns of the new administration when it comes to the security issues, when it comes to the participation to the security in the world. I think that there is certainly a very strong will on the EU side to take this part of responsibility. One of the things that, let's say, we are all saying, and there is a sort of agreement that the United States has changed, but also the European Union has changed during these 4 years and following this crisis, and that things will not go back to what they used to be before. And certainly, just to mention the impact of the, for example, of supply chains during the crisis is generating a completely different approach on how we should do this. And that's a problem that the United States has, but that we also have to be sure that at a certain point, how we can increase the resilience of our societies, how we can make it sure that next crisis, that who knows what is going to be, because now maybe we will get readier for a health crisis, and it can come from some other place. So there is a need also from that point of view to understand that we are all looking now at how to make our societies more resilient, more able to cope with the challenges that we have to face. The European Union wants to be a stronger partner. There is no doubt about this, and we want to have a strong partnership with the United States. This is also an element that, and from what the all that I've said, it's coming out very clearly about our willingness to work in that direction. That this is also done making us more able to stay on our own feet. And this is true in the area of defense. This is true in the area of let's say production of critical components. It is true also in the definition of the supply chains. And I hope it is true, for example, when it comes to the international role of the euro. I mean, there are many elements that are going that direction, and we should be, I think, mature enough on both sides to understand that meeting both ways means that we have to have the strength to walk that part of the walk, and to stay on our feet. I think there too I have honestly a positive feeling. Maybe I should have mentioned the name since the beginning. I'm speaking about strategic autonomy of the EU. Call it open or qualify however you want it. But the point of the strategic autonomy of the EU is very important. I think that the United States is perfectly capable of understanding the importance of this element, and we need to overcome this sense of uneasiness when we are speaking about this point and these elements. And it's good, for example, speaking about this, that now the United States wants to join one of our projects in the structured cooperation in the defense sector on military mobility, which is a very good sign. It's a good element that they want to be part of this process as an element creating even more connections and I would say interdependence. I would stop there because I think that we are all working with really with the same spirit. We want to make the transatlantic alliance a key pillar of our, let's say, not only foreign policy, I mean, but of our way of being. I think also in terms of space that sharing, not that the term is abused, but sharing the same values. I mean, having the same approach when it comes to open market, to the economy, to the way we deal with our societies. So we want to make it this, and in order to make this happen, we have to be able to be strong on many sectors, on many issues, and on many fronts.
Thank you, Stefano Sannino. So many good news, but also many actions to take, if I may. Marta, Dassù.
I will leave to the floor, Monica, because otherwise this is
straight to the floor. Okay.
Yeah,
so, but in any case, please, Marta is here. So
yeah, can I just one word, if I may?
Yes, absolutely.
Monica,
you should.
Before leaving to them, more or less, I agree with Charlie. The news and the very important news for us Europeans, is that the US are giving a new value to alliances. I was part, for instance, of the NATO reflection group, reflecting on NATO to 2030, and this was very clear. My doubt, but I don't want to elaborate on that, is that in the end, the Europeans do not completely share, and Stefano alluded to that, do not completely share the way in which the US is looking to this sort of double containment policy vis-a-vis Russia and vis-a-vis China. So there is room for disagreement in my view, but we can discuss it later on. Please.
Thank you, Marta. Since we have roughly a little more than half an hour, and I want definitely Marta to be back in the discussion again, maybe we could group questions and the discussion in groups of 3 so that our speakers can react to your suggestions. So if I see correctly in the chat, I have one question from Ben Prad, one Nina Garner, and the third one from Roberto Castaldi. So let's start by these 3 questions.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. So thank you to the speakers, Charles Kupchan and Stefano Sannino, for their presentations. I have 2 quick questions for Mr. Kupchan. The first one is about the Republican Party, because that was they have a big responsibility about of course, the fact that Donald Trump became president. So my question is if you see a different future also for the Republican Party to keep America staying back again with us, because obviously that's a key point. The second question is about President Biden slips apart, whether they are physical or verbal. The question is, do you think this might be a one-term presidency? And if yes, do you think that everything will be very open in 2024, or the most likely outcome would be for the vice president to be the key player there? These are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Very different questions focused on China. Question for Stefano. European Union is working, and we've all from the United States been seeing the excellent work on what we hope will be a mandatory European directive on due diligence and supply chains for human rights and environment, which is a great development. On the other hand, we're also seeing a trade and investment treaty between the EU and China. I'm not sure how those quite fit together. I'd love to hear you say something about that. And to Charlie, are we heading toward a trade war with China, or can we help not heading into a trade war with China when we have cultural genocide happening with the Uyghurs?
Roberto Castaldi, so we go back to our speakers.
Starting at the 2019 UN General Assembly, Trump said that the future is for patriots and not globalists. In a sense, he recognized that nationalism versus internationalism is the crucial cleavage in today's world. And since that time, the US, Russia, China, India, and Brazil went on the nationalist side, and the EU were the only one on the internationalist one. Now we have the US and the EU back on the same front again, but we'll need a strategy to get back at least India and Brazil as well through the Biden Democratic Alliance proposal. Is there a chance for this to happen really? Or because India and Brazil so far have been taking a different course, at least internally?
Charles, I think the floor is yours now, and you have such a variety of questions that you could speak for 3 days, but let's try to react to this.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Let me begin with a quick comment in response to Marta, because she raised an important issue that should be part of our conversation. If anything, I think that the Biden team is going to be too focused on Democratic allies. There's talk of creating a D10, turning the G7 into the D10, creating this new international order, which in some ways is the old international order, where we try to create an anchor that excludes non-democracies. I think that's a mistake. And yes, let's work closely with Europe, with Korea, with Taiwan, with Japan. But let's be honest, a lot of the issues that we collectively need to address require working with Russia and China, and to some extent with Saudi Arabia. And so I think that we should be careful not to overcorrect and not to think that we can go back to this world that is going to be based upon liberal principles. It ain't going to work that way. Briefly on the question on what's happening to the Republicans, I would say so far the picture is not good. And that's because Trump continues to be the most popular figure in the Republican Party. I think the base is sticking with him. 60 to 70% of Republicans still believe that Trump won the election. We are in a post-truth America. That's not going to change anytime soon. And I think the Republicans, unfortunately, believe that they can win elections as a minority party that reaches out primarily to whites. And surprisingly, they actually won more minority votes. They won more votes, Trump did in his second election, from Hispanic and Black men. That's a kind of surprising outcome. And so, and I don't think the Republicans are wrong. You know, if the Republicans are able to win back some white voters in suburbia, in swing states, they will take the midterms and they could take the next election. And that brings me to the second question. I think all of this depends on whether Biden can deliver. All of this depends on whether he can tame the pandemic, invest in infrastructure, get money to swing voters in the industrial heartland that need money. I mean, we know that they are hurting. They cannot live on $7.25 an hour. You just can't make it in this country on $7.25 an hour. And so the question is, can Biden fix these underlying problems? And for me, the big question, I don't want to get into the details of American politics, he's going to have to change the filibuster, because otherwise the Republicans will block him. He won't be able to deliver. You will have angry voters who go back to the Republicans. So my single piece of advice to Joe Biden is reform or ditch the filibuster so you can pass the legislation that you need to. And that, in the end, will bring Republicans back into being a constructive and responsible party, because they're going to have to start winning back the votes of all Americans, not just the votes of disaffected white Americans. Very briefly on trade with China, you know, I think, Nina, that Biden is going to, if he does anything on the trade front, stand up to China, because it plays well at home, and because it is sort of the elephant in the room, right? When he says we need a foreign policy for the middle class, what's the best way to do that? Open up the China market so that we can start exporting more goods, more soybeans, more agricultural products to the largest economy in the world in a few years.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Charlie. Stefano, Sannino, you wanted to react to one of the questions, please.
Yeah, I will start with this on China, and I cannot agree more with what Charlie said, in the sense that we live in a complex world, and somehow I know that it's a sort of platitude, but it's, I would say, the point is that let's be clear: we are not going to change China. We're not going to change their attitude and the way they are with a number of things. So we will need to, I would say, to live with this. We need to live with the country that at the same time is a rival from a strategic point of view, and we have to try to constrain and push back as much as possible. And that applies also to Russia, by the way. But let's say Russia is a little bit of a different problem to me. But China is also engaging in other areas. While China is taking a very strong stand in a number of issues, it's engaging in others. It's working with us when it comes to climate change, maybe a little bit lazily, but still doing some part of the work. And as Charles was saying, China is an important economic partner, whether we like it or not. And in order to open up the China market, we need and to create a more level playing field, we need to do what we have done, which is create the conditions for our investors to go there. And that's the essence of the agreement on investments that we have finalized in December. Does it mean that we are not taking care of human rights? No, I mean, it is not the case. And I think that there will be very visible elements on the table soon that will make it clear that we do not share the way they are dealing with minorities. They don't share the way that we are, that they are dealing with Hong Kong. And we are making it clearly as clear as possible and reacting to their decisions. But this is the this is how to say the complexity that we will need to manage. We cannot believe that with a country you go all the way in a direction or completely on the other. And then maybe on the question of nationalism, internationalism. I think that what is first of all, we should recall countries like Canada or Japan or South Korea, which are already part of this league of internationalists, if we want to call this way. I have to say that there is a very interesting evolution taking place in India. I see that India is moving very much from a sort of old mentality attitude to one which is much of, let's say, more isolationist or more, let's say, bilateralist, to one of cooperation and of using the multilateral framework as well. It's very interesting the work that we are doing together. We have a summit scheduled in May with India, and I have to say that it is maybe one of the most interesting developments in the last few years.
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Stefano. Marta, would you jump into the conversation, because there was also this point about Mediterranean, East Mediterranean, the fact that
one point on replying to Nina, I think that the kind of agreement the Europeans reached with China, that was very much a result of the German presidency of the European Union. Clearly for Germany, the Chinese market is a very relevant one, to say the least, but also for Italy. Do not forget that Italian exports to the Chinese market increased by 33% last September 2020. So from this point of view, clearly the Europeans have to take into consideration the importance of economic relationship. And still, this agreement is not far away from the phase one agreement already reached in the United States by Trump, by the way, in January 2020. The problem is another one, in my view, the fact that the Russian policy and the policy vis-a-vis China that we have been trying to adopt in recent years do not work. So, okay, we have a double containment strategy. Charles, I read this interim national security strategy published by Biden, and it is very clear. You have a double containment. You have a mental scheme according to which we have democracies. They're out there are autocracies. And the idea is that we can rebuild a sort of enlarged West, Europe plus the Indo-Pacific democracies under the American leadership. The point is that it doesn't work. My real concern is that in particular, Russian policy doesn't work at all. We made common mistakes, I guess, since the end of the Cold War, but the end result is that Putin is still there, and we are not able to reconquer, quote unquote, Crimea or I don't know, to solve the Ukrainian crisis. We are not able at all to make a difference in the internal debate in Russia. And the real question mark is whether Biden is simply going back to the Russian hawks in the State Department, et cetera, or is trying to devise a sort of new policy. And this is even more true for the European Union. I'm sorry, Stefano, but the way in which Borrell ran his visit to Moscow very recently was a kind of defeat for the European Union. And then we have the constant problem of how to combine sectoral policies vis-à-vis China and vis-à-vis Russia, in particular in the of energy dependence and et cetera, to sit at the table, we, meaning the US and Europe, and try to discuss which kind of policy can work. Because my impression is that our policy does not work, in particular vis-à-vis Russia, even more than vis-à-vis China. And then there is a sort of mental disconnect. Stefano was alluding to that. In my view, for the US, it's all about rebuilding the US leadership, America's back, over a democratic West, which is fine for me, but I mean, it's a conception. For the Europeans, for the reasons already mentioned by Stefano, we see a multipolar world run by multilateral agreements. And Europe is conceiving itself, rightly or wrongly, as a sort of new sovereign pole. So, I mean, there is not such an interest in going back to a situation of junior partner vis-à-vis the US, also because the trust in the US leadership is diminished as compared to some years ago. Finally, a third point, and very briefly on Italy. Italy is a country that loves the Atlantic, in the sense that Italy is better off when Europe and the US go well together. And for a very simple reason, in my view, our economic system, or better, its most dynamic part, is largely integrated within the German economic space and value chains, while our country is part of the US strategic space in the Euro-Mediterranean region. So whenever we have a clash between continental Europe and the US, Italy suffers, as was very clear in the last 4 years. So for Italy, rebuilding a new kind of relationship between Europe and the United States is very important. In my view, Mario Draghi could be the right person to try to play a role in this exercise, also because we are in a strange situation in which we share the G20, we share the COP26 on climate change together with the UK. In any case, we are in a situation in which we can say something on this front, and we absolutely need, I mean, Italy, we need the American diplomatic backing in the Mediterranean. We are trying hard to regain any influence in Libya, and that implies an agreement with Turkey in Tripolitania. The American diplomatic backing is very important, so as that we are able to play a role. The Eastern Mediterranean, Charles was alluding to that, must be part of this kind of bargain. Clearly, the concern on Italy's side is to be out on other issues, East Asia, for instance, or Iran. In those theaters, in my view, the possibility of the EU at 3, the usual UK, France, and Germany, with Italy out, is a real possibility. But for the rest, and in the Mediterranean especially, I think that we are fully in the game, and we will play it along this line, if you wish, the traditional golden rule of Italian foreign policy, combining more European integration and more transatlantic relations. It is the time to try to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. If you agree, I would suggest that we make a second round of quick question and answers. I don't get if Nicola Bonucci has just a comment or wanted to make a question. For sure, Riccardo Perisic had a question, so I leave the floor to him, and then Fabrizio Pagani.
Oh, yes, thank you. No, my question is a quick one to Stefano. We hear lots of confusing things about US vaccine protectionism, and they are both confusing and dangerous. So it should be clarified. Can you clarify it? But since I have the floor, a quick remark on Marta. I am not sure that the Russian policy is failing. Russian policy is a policy of containment, and these things take a long time. Our objective is not to change Russia. Russia will be changed by Russians. Our policy is to make sure that Russia is contained in the aggression that they multiply towards us. And in that Russia is the weak element in this relationship. It is in economic decline, in demographic decline. The importance of our energy imports is going to decline over time if the climate policy succeeds. So Russia is on the weak side of the policy. All we have to do is to continue, and they have nothing to gain. On some things we can make agreements, but there is no grand bargain or a great advantage that we can obtain from changing our policy to Russia. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. You want to make your question
Well,
so that we
actually,
make the last round.
Yeah, well, actually, it was on Russia, and Marta had a very good point. So I would like just to to take the cue from what Riccardo was saying and ask Stefano, to whom I say hello. You were not there at the beginning, so thank you, Stefano, for being with us. And to Charlie, Russia, the relationship with Russia, which to me it seems somehow, how can I say, an even more pressing issue than China. China is really for the long run, but Russia could, let me use a very plain word, it could cause problem which we see now and tomorrow and after tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Maybe, Stefano, you could take the floor about vaccines and Russia, and then we leave Charlie the last word for our meeting today.
Yeah, with pleasure. On vaccine, I think that honestly, I don't know if there is a confusion, because on the contrary, on the line has spoken about the difference between US and UK, and saying that with US everything is working very well, and that essentially things are going back and forth, because it is true that the chains, the production chains, is partly in Europe and partly in the US, and we have never experienced any kind of problem. The problem was much more with UK, where essentially 10 million doses went to the UK, authorized by the European Union, and nothing was coming to Europe. So from that point of view, no accusation of protectionism on vaccines on our side. On the contrary, recognition that is working fine. On Russia, this is a very, first of all, if I may, more than contain, I would speak about constrain. I mean, it's the problem is not containment. I would not like to go back to a sort of Cold War mentality, because in any case, it would be much more difficult and complex to do it now. I think that Fabrizio is right in saying that the relations with Russia is complex. In a way, the idea of living on Russia on its own and letting it drift away, it's not really something reassuring for anybody, because Russia is still using the military arm, and something that in the West we are starting to have problems with. I mean, they don't have problems to send boots on the ground, in whatever format it is, or green men without insignia, as it happened in eastern Ukraine, or through the Wagner groups in Libya, or through the military presence in the Caucasus. But I mean, so we need to take also this element into account. But that said, I tend to agree with Riccardo that our policy with Russia, I don't see it as a failure. Now we can then decide whether the visit was well done or not, if there were decisions which were correct or not in the visit. But I think that at the end of the day, it helped clarifying very much the position of the European Union. The reaction was of the EU was unanimous. We have identified a number of areas in which we will continue working, including the people-to-people contacts with all the difficulties that this entails, because Russia is not certainly helping opening up the society. So this is, and I think that we need to, insisting on this point, we need to stay firm on our principles when it comes to a rule of law, when it comes to a democratic space, when it comes to the shrinking of the civil society space. I just want one, and then also energy dependence. True. I mean, and I'm not saying that there is no energy dependence, but we are also changing very much the pattern of our energy production in the European Union, moving towards a decarbonized economy, much less dependent on fuels compared with what used to be before. So let's see also this in perspective. I tend to agree on the point, and that actually is what I was making, about the fact, not because we do not like to be a junior partner in the coalition, but because I think that a more balanced, the partnership is stronger if the two partners are strong. If they can both feel comfortable one with the other and knowing that they can rely on each other. So I mean, this to me, I do not see as a problem. We need to demystify this. We need to be very open and very clear with our American friends, and to talk very freely, exactly because of this administration is bringing in new elements. And then maybe about what your foreign policy can do in the world, we have to devote another session, because it's it's a quite complex answer.
We'll do that.
Absolutely. We're going to ask Fabrizio to organize another section on this. Charles Kupchan, now the floor is yours for this last word. Yes, on Russia, also on the real chance that the Biden administration decides to sit on the table with you and decide to shape a common policy in some specific issues. The floor is yours.
Yeah, maybe I'll end with a kind of speculative remark, or perhaps something that we could put on the agenda. And that is that, you know, the big story of the next decade or two is China. It's not Russia. The rise of China is changing the world.
Yeah.
And we need to kind of figure out what that means. And I think that the Russian alliance with China is unnatural, and that beneath the surface it is fragile. And you know, if I were sitting in the Kremlin today and I looked east and I looked west, I would be much more concerned about my west than about my east than my west. You know, I mean, yeah, okay. Was NATO expansion a good idea? I don't know. Have we mucked around in Georgia and Ukraine? Yeah. But does NATO and Italy and Germany, do we really pose a threat to Russia? I don't think so. China, on the other hand, is huge. China has more or less colonized Central Asia, which used to be a Russian pond. And so I think that we should have a conversation across the Atlantic about how to pull Russia westward, how to use the rise of China as a potential means of improving the relationship with Russia. It would be good for all of us. I don't think it's easy, because as long as Putin is in power and surrounded by his oligarchs, he will probably continue to play the card of Russian and Eurasian nationalism. But I do think there is a strategic opportunity that's out there, and that we should try to figure out how to take advantage of it.
Charlie, it's always such a privilege listening to you. Fabrizio, I think I leave you the floor to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, just to say thank you again. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Marta and Monica, of course. I think we have already a plan for the next webinar on foreign policy, because we need to discuss about Italian foreign policy. But Stefano, we want you back, huh?
I will, and I will try. I will try to have a better connection by then.
You look wonderful anyhow. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.
Ciao. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao a
Thanks.
tutti.